Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Wayne Holden, President and CEO at RTI International, and I want to thank you for joining us today. For those of you who may not be familiar with this organization, we're an independent nonprofit research institute that provides research, development, and technical services worldwide, grounded in scientific rigor. We work on many of the world's most pressing problems, and we've been here for almost 60 years. Our clients rely on us to answer questions that demand objective and multidisciplinary approaches. Working together with our partners, we design and lead projects that consider social, economic, programmatic, and technological factors that are critical to success in terms of changing things and improving the human condition. The work we do gives our clients the results they need: reliable data, thorough analysis, technological innovation, and sustainable programs to inform policy decisions and to ground practice in evidence for the good of people and communities around the world. Today you're here to learn more about our traffic stop study in Durham and our soon-to-be available RTI traffic stop analysis tool. Let me start by telling you that the genesis of this work came from a request from the Durham Police Department to examine whether there was racial disproportionality in traffic stops. A lot of organizations would have shied away from knowing the answer to that question, but the Durham Police Department asked us to look critically at their operations. We were pleased to bring our research experience to this challenge, and seeing the value that it could provide, we made the decision to self-fund the work. I'd also like to say that we self-fund a lot of our work, actually, and good examples of that recently are several projects on the Zika virus that we self-funded. RTI didn't receive any outside funding for the study and the tool we're discussing today. Again, it was all driven by our own resources here. As a result, we're creating an online tool that will assist law enforcement agencies around the country in understanding the racial distribution of traffic stops using the veil of darkness approach that we used in studying the Durham Police Department. And you'll hear about that shortly from our researchers here. What I want to leave you with is the idea that there are things that as a society that we need to know to improve the lives of our citizens and our communities. That's the place for research, especially applied research on social problems that oftentimes are difficult to study, difficult to understand, but we do our best with our skills and abilities to do that. That's how we drive change with respect to the world. The tool, as I mentioned previously, will be available in a few weeks. We're continuing to work on it. It'll be used hopefully locally and continue to be used by the police departments in this area, including the Durham Police Department, but others as well. We commend the police department for recognizing that an issue was there that they wanted to have more information about, and for joining us and asking us to get involved in a partnership with them to try to help them to identify issues and come up with ways that they could continue on their course of improvement in providing services to the community. We're honored to have Chief Larry Smith here and Deputy Chief A.R. Marsh to talk about that. We're also pleased that Durham Mayor Bill Bell and Durham City Manager Thomas Bonfield have joined us today. Also joining us is Dr. Kevin Strom, the Director of RTI's Policing, Security, and Investigative Science Program, and Dr. Travis Taniguchi, a research criminologist at RTI, who led the research for the report we're discussing today. And now I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Kevin Strom, who will speak to you about how we conducted this research. Thank you.
Good afternoon. I'm Kevin Strom, Director of Policing, Security, and Investigative Science Program here at RTI International. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for the introduction, Dr. Holden. First, I would like to echo Dr. Holden's remarks and commend the Durham Police Department for their commitment to addressing this issue and towards pursuing a research-informed approach for understanding police interactions with members of the community, and specifically the minority community. A common criticism of law enforcement agencies, especially in cities as diverse as Durham, is that police traffic stops involve a disproportionate number of minorities when compared to the racial composition of the jurisdiction. Critically, these types of comparisons typically use census population estimates to establish an external benchmark for the driving population. Census estimates, however, demonstrate only where people reside and serve as a poor proxy for the actual driving population. Census population cannot accurately measure the population at risk in terms of exposure to police contact. RTI conducted a series of analyses to address this methodological limitation. To test for racial bias in traffic stops conducted by the Durham Police Department, we employed the veil of darkness method, which is based on the assumption that officers have a significantly diminished ability to observe the race and gender of a driver during periods of darkness. This is a thoroughly vetted methodology that has been conducted in a number of other cities, including Oakland, California, Cincinnati, Ohio, and Syracuse, New York. Using this method, we analyze racial disproportionality by comparing the race of drivers stopped during daylight to the race of those stopped during darkness. This aspect of the methodology is an important feature of the analysis because officers cannot easily observe the race of the driver when it is dark. Stops occurring during darkness serve as a comparison group, which is theoretically free of racial bias. The study examined traffic stops only during the intertwilight period, roughly between 5:30 p.m. and 9 p.m., during which it is light at some times of the year, but dark during other times. When we refer to daylight, we are referring to periods of light in the intertwilight period. Similarly, when we refer to darkness, we are referring to periods of darkness in the intertwilight period. Restricting the analysis to this period is a critical component of the method and was done to reduce the variation in travel patterns that are dependent on time of day. Focusing on this time period helps to ensure that the drivers during darkness are similar to the drivers during daylight. Moving now to key findings from the study. Overall, across the 5-year period, we did find evidence of racial disproportionality in traffic stops conducted by the DPD. However, the evidence suggests that this effect is limited to male drivers, demonstrating that there is a race-gender interaction and that the black males specifically are more likely to be stopped during daylight when the driver's race and sex is more discernible. Overall, the odds that a stopped driver was black were 12% higher when the stop occurred during daylight hours than when the stop occurred in darkness. Among males, the odds that a stopped driver was black were 20% higher when the traffic stop occurred during daylight than when it occurred in darkness. Importantly, no evidence of racial disproportionality was found when the analysis was restricted to females. The analysis also found that the relationship between lighting and driver demographics was conditional upon police assignment. We did not find evidence of racial bias among traffic stops conducted by the dedicated traffic units. However, black males were overrepresented during the daylight stops conducted by DPD's High Enforcement Abatement Team, or HEAT, and the patrol unit. For the High Enforcement Abatement Team, the odds that a stopped male driver was black were 44% higher during daylight than in darkness. And for the patrol unit, the odds that a stopped male driver was black were 17% higher during daylight than darkness. Importantly, the relationship between lighting and driver race was conditional upon year, with findings showing racial disproportionality decreasing over time. In the years 2014 and 2015, we found no evidence to suggest that black drivers were disproportionately represented in traffic stops conducted by the Durham Police Department. It is also important to note that we applied this methodology to study state-sourced traffic stop data from Raleigh, Fayetteville, and Greensboro due to their similar populations and socio-demographic makeup. No evidence of racial bias was found in these cities. Finally, as Dr. Holden mentioned, we have developed an analytic tool that replicates key components of the analysis conducted as part of this study. This open source tool will be made available in the coming weeks via RTI's website and be free to use by law enforcement and members of the public. And now I would like to offer Chief Smith of the Durham Police Department an opportunity to address you all. Dr. Taniguchi and I will be happy to answer any questions related to the research after that. Thank you.
Good afternoon. First, I want to thank RTI International for their work in analyzing our traffic stop data to help us identify possible causes of our disparity. It was important to our organization to have a well-respected independent firm conduct the study that we're here to discuss today. This is a study that the Durham Police Department requested. It's critical that we determine if bias could actually be a factor in the disparity that's been found in our traffic stops. And since the Human Relations Commission's report, we've been trying to find an answer to that question. Our police department is full of dedicated, well-trained, sworn, and non-sworn employees. And it's essential that we get an objective view of our operations and, in turn, be willing to not only accept the findings, but continue to work toward putting the necessary tools in place to address any issues which may be identified and to ensure that bias of any kind is never a part of Durham police operations. The RTI study establishes a benchmark. Now we know where we stand. This analysis also reveals that some of the changes we've put in place since 2014 may have begun to address some of the concerns raised. Since 2014, there is no evidence to suggest that black drivers were disproportionately represented in traffic stops. We believe the improvements are a result of the changes in our policies, procedures, and training that we've instituted in the past few years. This shows that we are willing to listen to our residents and make adjustments in our policing practices when necessary. It's imperative that our organization maintains a strong partnership with our community, and we've taken additional measures to enhance police-community relations. All officers have completed fair and impartial policing training, and the training is now included in basic law enforcement training curriculum for all new recruits. Officers have recently received verbal conflict and de-escalation training, and select personnel have been trained as trainers through the U.S. Department of Justice on procedural justice and police legitimacy. And of course, DPD will now utilize RTI's reliable tool to continue to track traffic stop data. We've progressively worked to establish procedures to ensure fair and balanced policing during stops as well. Signed written forms are required for all consent searches during traffic stops. Heat, patrol, and traffic services units have been outfitted with in-car cameras. The department conducts semi-annual traffic stop data reviews, which includes a detailed analysis for any officer with at least 25 traffic stops and a 75% or higher stop rate of minorities. Complaints resulting from traffic stops are thoroughly investigated by the Professional Standards Division in an attempt to identify patterns. This study does not establish an overall organizational bias within the Durham Police Department, but it helps us pinpoint where improvement is needed. To those communities that have been most vocal with these concerns, I want to say, we heard you. You may have thought we did not, but we did, and the request for this report is evidence of that. We met earlier today with many of the leaders within your communities to share these findings and plans going forward. And although there has been considerable improvement since 2014, the command staff of this organization is totally committed to working with you, our officers, and the new chief to ensure that bias is never a part of police operations. We must now move forward and continue to find ways to address the issues revealed in this study with ongoing strategic training, necessary policy adjustments, and continued community engagement. Thank you. I'm sorry, Mayor.
Thank you, Chief. First of all, let me again thank RTI and Dr. Holden and your staff for the work that you've done. I just thought it was important as the mayor of the city to give a little bit more background and context of the study we've just heard and going to hear more about. As you probably may or may not know, that in October 2013, I requested the Durham Human Relations Commission, with the consent of my colleagues on the City Council, to conduct a review of allegations of racial bias and racial profiling brought by citizens against the Durham Police Department. The Human Relations Commission held a series of public hearings over a period of 6 months and issued its findings and recommendations to the City Council in April of 2015. In conducting their review, the Durham Human Relations Commission heard from representatives of the Durham Police Department, community advocacy groups, and individual citizens. And the reviews were not isolated to police stops. It included a review and recommendations on Durham Police Department policies, stops and consent searches, training, diversion programs, Citizens Police Review Board complaints and internal affairs, and the use of body cameras and in-car cameras. However, as it pertains to police stops, and based on their research, supported by testimony from the Durham citizens, the Human Relations Commission concluded that there was the existence of racial bias and profiling present in the Durham Police Department. The City Council, the City Manager, and the Durham Police Department reviewed the Human Relations Commission's report and its recommendations. And many of those recommendations, as you heard from Chief Smith, have been adopted or are in the process of being adopted or reviewing. And again, I want to thank Dr. Holden and RTI. This is a well-respected institution for their veil of darkness analysis of this very important data on the Durham Police Department's traffic stop reports over the past 5 years. This analysis has occurred through 2015. And although there has been disagreement between the Police Department and the Human Relations Commission on the existence of racial profiling in the Durham Police Department, I also want to commend Chief Smith and his command staff and his leadership in requesting this report and this analysis. and also his leadership on continuing the efforts of trying to provide enhanced police-community relationships in our community. And I'm pleased to know that this tool is going to be made available. I'm pleased to know that we've taken the position that we've taken, that we're trying to be as transparent as possible in this process. And I'm convinced that this is just one other step in moving us further and enhancing the police-community relationships in our community. And I want to thank all that have been involved in making this happen. Thank you.
I'm Jorge, reporter from North Carolina Public Radio. I had a question for the chief or the deputy chief.
Sure.
So, having looked at the report, I was wondering if you have any explanation or any theory why the heat team's rate with the racial disparity is significantly higher than the traffic team's rate.
Well, that's a good question, and a memo that I just sent out internally to all of our officers, and we met with some of the leaders of some of the groups who have been most vocal about this. And when we went through the fair and impartial policing with Dr. Lori Ferdale, one of the things she said that really struck with me, she said, listen, you have to be careful in the leadership of law enforcement that you don't lend to a possibility of an implicit bias by the way you ask your officers to go out and police. And our heat teams have been asked over the years to go out into some of our highest crime communities, which unfortunately are often mostly minority communities, and try to help us deal with the crime problem in Durham. And if you're not careful when you do that and you send that out, you can feed into that implicit bias. We don't know what causes it exactly. The report doesn't show that. But that's why it's important among us as law enforcement leaders when we find things like this to try to address it and look at that. And those are some things we'll be looking at as we think about what our heat team does, the training they receive, and the community of Durham's expectations of its police department going forward.
Just one follow-up. I mean, were you surprised to see that the disparity that was that stark?
Yes, I was. I was very surprised to see it. Well, let me clarify that. Not the disparity. I wasn't surprised to see the disparity. We've reported disparities in our own internal reports. The question that has been raised is could bias be part of the disparity? And clearly, some say it is. They've said from the beginning it is. As the RTI has stated, what they've used most of that is census data. But we, from the beginning, have wanted an honest answer to that question. And that's why when we were able to partner with RTI and get an honest answer to that question, and we feel like we've gotten that, and we're glad to have it.
Sorry, so another follow-up. So are you? So you're saying that at this point, I mean, is it clear to you whether the disparity is because there is a bias in the patrol on part of the patrol officers, or simply given the geographical location where the heat team typically operates? Sorry, was that it? Do you want me to re-ask it again?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry. So is it clear to you whether the reason why the heat team is shown to pull over black male drivers at a higher rate than the traffic team, is it clear to you whether that is the case because of the geographical area where they're patrolling or because there is an implicit bias?
You know, I'm not sure. I mean, I think the disparity is clearly because of the areas in which we work, but this report clearly showed that there was some evidence of racial bias, disparity in the bias. So to say definitively that that's the cause of the entire disparity, I can't say that, but I know it's something we have to accept and deal with as part of that problem.
One last follow-up.
Okay.
So last follow-up. You were mentioning that you were talking to some community leaders this morning. You've had some internal communications about this already. Are there any steps that you're taking right now to address that and to be able to answer some of these questions that this raises for you now?
Yes, it is.
Well,
I'm not going to go into too many specifics. I'm sure most of you know that we're soon to appoint a new chief in Durham. And we're also soon to get a report from the International Association's Chiefs of Police and how we deploy our resources for staffing reasons and for reasons that may lend to this. So this executive team really for the last couple months have had some pretty significant conversations about where we go in policing in Durham for a lot of reasons, for community demands, for staffing reasons. And so, yes, we have some plans, we have some things to put in place that we think is going to make policing in Durham better anyway. but we also think it'll have an impact on these. And they already have. Let's be reminded that in 2014, 2015, that disparity bias does not show. So we feel like some of the things that's already been done have already been successful, but we want to build on that.
Good afternoon. Thomas with the News and Observer. I have a couple of questions. First of all, the sort of follows Jorge's question. 20 times more likely to be stopped during the daylight hours. Is that also a function of implicit bias? If you take away the geographical location that sort of directs the deployment of the heat team, but you still got during the daylight hours black males in particular being 20 times more likely to be stopped. Is that implicit bias?
So it's not 20 times more likely to be stopped. It's an odds ratio that's 20% higher. So there's a higher risk of a higher probability that the driver is going to be black when the traffic stop occurs during the daylight period of the times that we analyzed.
Why?
So that's a more complicated question. Our analysis only really looks at that outcome, right? What happens or what the probability of the race is of the driver. The features or the decision making or the process that is motivating that disparity is not something that we answer directly with this. There's any number of causes that it might be. It might be implicit racial bias, like the chief has mentioned, something that's completely unknown to the conscious mind of the officer. They may not be aware of the fact that they're doing this. But answering the why that disparity exists is beyond the scope of this research.
And then, I could direct this question to you as well. The tool that was mentioned, can you sort of share with us the traffic analysis stop tool? If I'm mispronouncing the acronym, I'm sorry, but how will that work?
So it'll be online, it'll be free for agencies to use. It's a website, so somebody would have this traffic stop data available. They go online to that website, they upload their data, input some information, and then the program runs. Basically all of this analysis that we did runs it automatically for the user. And then it comes out at the end with some information, some diagnostics, and some recommendations for next steps to take on what else you can analyze and what can be done with that information.
And it's specifically for law enforcement agencies?
It'll be accessible to everyone.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Chief Smith, Colin Warren Hicks from the Herald Sun. At the recent crime cabinet meeting with the City Council, you gave numbers presenting the percentage that young black males make up of the population of Durham and the percentage of, I think it was violent crime committed by that demographic. And it was a big disproportion in terms of the amount of crime given the low number, the demographic. When you're looking at, and also you were talking about reallocating resources to help prevent crime. Can you talk a little bit about the balance that you'll need to achieve to try to prevent racial bias pulling people over, but at the same time, when you're trying to, prevent crime, you're looking at a very particular demographic?
Got it? Well, listen, you did see the report, and we do have a huge overrepresentation of young black males as both victims and as suspects. And so, but that's really a different conversation than this. And you can do good police work without there being evidence of bias. And we have to find that balance. You talked about the crime, and we got to have some assistance. And as we met with many community leaders today, we talked about this report and what it said. We didn't talk about crime because it wasn't what it was about. It was about this. But at the end of that, we did say we're going to have a conversation about crime and how crime plays into this too. So there is a balance. as it relates to separating the two, though, that's where we as leadership in the police department, in any police department, when you know that the vast majority of your victims of crime are African American, and the vast majority of your suspects, particularly, are African American males, yes, that means that's where we're doing a lot of our policing and interacting policing. But then when you have a study like this, you have to be sure that you're not drifting over into making assumptions. And we're human beings, and that can happen. So when we get information like this, that's where we have to sit back and take a really hard look at ourselves as professionals. And now we've got good data, and we've shown a lot of improvement. And we're glad of that, and we're glad we can continue to track this going forward, because that's been the ongoing question, as the mayor said from HRC, is, does this disparity that law enforcement's beat up with, does that mean bias? And our statement all along was disparity doesn't equal bias, and that's still a true statement. But now they have given us some data here that we need to take a look at. But once again, we've seen that go away in 14, 15. Now we can continue to look at it in 16 and 17. But that's about the bias. That's not about the disproportionality and the huge disparity in suspect and victimization. That's a separate issue.
If I can follow up on that just real briefly, in response to your question, we've redirected some of the heat team's focus. In the past, we've spent a lot of time concentrating on areas, locations. Here lately, we've tried to identify problem people and focus our efforts towards those persons as opposed to specific areas. So going forward, we'll hopefully see some positive returns from that redirection.
I would also add that what you raised is a challenge not only for Durham, but also for departments across the country as moving forward.
Just to be clear, the statement disproportionality doesn't mean bias. I might have mixed the words. Has that changed at all? Or is that still
Disparity.
Disparity.
Right.
Yeah. Is that still the term you're going to stick with?
Well, that disparity doesn't mean bias. That's still a true statement. Okay, just because you stop a higher group of any group, that doesn't necessarily mean that the cause of that is bias. That was the whole purpose of us coming to RTI. We have a huge disparity. All right, and we have a huge disparity in a lot of things: traffic stops, how people are victimized, how people commit crimes. And so we had a huge disparity. So we wanted to know that underlying question, could bias be part of that disparity? And the answer in that, at least for the first 3 years of that, was yes, it could be part of that from their study. And certainly 14 and 15, we've seen that change a little bit. But that doesn't mean, if it hadn't shown at all for us, like it did for Greensboro and Raleigh, that doesn't mean that we don't still tackle these issues. These issues are going to be raised in law enforcement from here going forward, and they're serious issues. And so you need to always work to make sure that your policing is fair and as it can be when you're deploying your resources.
Hi, Jorge, WNC Radio. So it seems that it appears that there was a decline in the disparity starting in 2009 down to 2014. So the rate at which black males were pulled over dropped, and it got much closer to the rate in which white male drivers dropped during that 5-year period. How do you explain that drop and that decrease in the disparity, if you will?
So the more complicated answer to that question is that it's not that the disparities change so much as the differences in the proportion of black drivers stopped during daylight versus those stopped during darkness. Those proportions are converging. And so those becoming closer together is indicative of less evidence that there's bias in the police activity or decision making that's leading up to the stop. So it doesn't really matter how many white male drivers are stopped. It's really more of the comparison of day versus dark.
Thank you. So I misinterpreted that. Thank you very much. I understand now. Chief or Deputy Chief, would you care to comment on why that figure changed?
I'm not sure. That's why we're leaving a lot of all of the science to these folks. It is times that I can read some of their science and say I get it, and other times I can read some of their science and say I'm not sure I understand what this is saying. But they're reputable enough that, and obviously they tell us that this shows, and we accept that. But so as far as why that changed, only thing I know for sure by what they've said is in 14 and 15 it did not show that level of bias. And I mentioned in my opening remarks much of the training that we've done, many of the things we've put in place. Now I can't draw a causation on that, but we believe that the only thing that's changed since 13 to 14 and 15 is those things that we've done.
And this is a question for Drs. Holden, Strummer, Taniguchi. Just if any of you care to say why you were interested in taking on this project.
Well, RTI has one, as Dr. Holden mentioned, we are dedicated to conducting applied research, and especially research that has an impact on the human condition. In this case, we also have an active policing research program, and working with agencies like Durham is one of the things that we really take on as part of that mission, especially when we find and can identify agencies that really are interested in using the data to look introspectively and improve how they do things and how they interact with the community.
I would just add that we also take seriously our role as citizens in the community in terms of helping the community in whatever way we can, whether this is an example of working collaboratively with a group in the community. We do a lot of outreach with community organizations and try to help in lots of different ways, and that's just part of the framework for our organization.
Hi, Michael Highland from WNCN. I wanted to ask, you mentioned that you did not find evidence of racial bias in Raleigh and Fayetteville and Greensboro. So is there anything you found that's different in the approach that Durham police are taking to the traffic stops that's not happening in those cities?
Like I mentioned before, the results from this analysis are largely descriptive in what we find, and getting at that underlying question of causality and what's driving those differences or lack of differences is not something that we have analyzed yet.
Is that something the police department's looking into?
Yes, we have spoken with RTI about maybe doing a more in-depth look at things and going forward and how we can use this data and maybe dissect it and get down into even deeper into it and maybe what drives this. So those are some conversations we'll be having going forward in the future.
Can you specify which community leaders that you've talked to?
Sure. We spoke with Mark Anthony Middleton, Pastor Mark Anthony Middleton. He represents CAN, and we spoke with Omar Beasley from the Durham Community Affairs of Black People. We spoke with Fred Foster from the NAACP, David Hall from the Southern Coalition, and FADE, and Harold Chestnut from PAC, and I believe that was it. That was it. And Fred Foster from the NAACP, I mentioned him, yes, Fred Foster from the NAACP. And Clarence Burkhead, he's on the law enforcement committee of the Durham Community Affairs of Black People. Yep.
That's all the questions we have. Thank you very much for coming, and have a very great afternoon.